Before I introduce our presenters tonight, I want to remind everyone that today, January 27th, is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The UN General Assembly designated as such in 2005 to commemorate the genocide that took the lives of 6 million Jews and 11 million other people. The date, January 27th, was chosen because it was on this date in 1945 that the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp was liberated. And I'd like to just share a quote from UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who said in 2008, "The International Day in Memory of the Victims of the Holocaust is thus a day on which we must reassert our commitment to human rights. We must also go beyond remembrance and make sure that new generations know this history. We must apply the lessons of the Holocaust to today's world, and we must do our utmost so that all peoples may enjoy the protections and rights for which the United Nations stands." So tonight, in commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, Port Washington Library is proud to present an encore virtual presentation of the survivor photography exhibit that was on display at the library 1 year ago. Many of you, I'm sure, do remember that exhibit. The survivors in the exhibit came from all over Western and Eastern Europe and are currently residents of Nassau, Suffolk, and Queens Counties, including 2 port residents, Gloria Glantz and Stan Ronnell. I personally found this exhibit to be very powerful, moving, and ultimately inspirational. And I think this is something that we all are in need of right now. Our presenters tonight, who helped put this exhibit together, are Dinah Kramer and Danny Weiss, and here's a little background about them. Danny Weiss is a renowned photographer in New York City and Nassau County, but he never planned on being a photographer and was previously a professional actor for 10 years. The gift of a photography class from his wife changed the course of his life, and he was immediately hooked. And he looks to continue to tell stories and express himself creatively through his work. His photography can be found in numerous publications. Danny has a special love of photographing in the water, and his fine artwork of the ocean can be seen at DannyWprints.com. That's DannyWprints.com. And before retiring, Dinah Kramer was a teacher at Martin Van Buren High School in Queens, working with deaf and hard of hearing students. After retiring, she became involved in Holocaust education as a way to honor her parents, who were both Holocaust survivors. Dinah currently volunteers at the Holocaust Resource Center at Temple Judea in Manhasset and helps Rabbi Siff run the Adopt a Survivor program at the Reconstructionist Synagogue in Plandome. So I'm now going to turn things over to Danny and Dinah, who will share more of the story of how this exhibit came to be. And I hope all of you find some inspiration as you view these powerful photos. So just give me a moment as I switch over to our main slideshow. Sorry, just one sec. Take it away, guys.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the Port Washington Library for initially presenting this exhibit and for having this encore presentation this evening. It's an odd thing to talk to a computer screen, but I am excited to know that so many people have tuned in to see the images, hear a little bit about the project itself. The question that I probably get asked more than any other question is how this project began. And, you know, quite simply, about 3.5 years or so ago, or even 4 years ago, I was with my then 12-and-a-half-year-old son, and he was part of his bar mitzvah process, invited to hear a Holocaust survivor speak. It was part of his process to becoming a bar mitzvah. And frankly, I was internally dreading the conversation. I had so many memories of my own bar mitzvah process and being invited to these kind of lectures when I was 10, 11, 12, 13. And I found, frankly, the imagery, the stuff of nightmares, the conversations to be just really terrifying. And I didn't express that to my son, but internally I was feeling, I guess, protective and really not looking forward to it. By no means do I think that those very graphic, realistic images of the Holocaust are not necessary. I think they're absolutely necessary. But nevertheless, when you're a father, you are protected. So I was not really looking forward to the conversation. What transpired that evening was polar opposite of what I expected. Speaking that night, and he is part of my photography project, was Irving Roth. And the man that stood in front of me was a man that had an incredible zest for life, a passion for life. And as I was listening to him speak, and he was telling his story of his time in the Holocaust and his life afterwards, more than anything, I was just inspired. I found a man who probably in his greatest act of defiance against this atrocity that befell him was a man who lived a full life. He came to America, he had a career, he started a family, he had children, he had grandchildren. And it dawned upon me in that moment, this was a true definition of a survivor who some 75 years later lived a full life, a complete life, and did not allow that terrible chapter in his life to solely define who he had become. So in that moment, I just immediately wanted to photograph him. And that was really the extent of what my intentions were. I thought it would be interesting just to photograph him as an individual. I am a professional photographer. And, sometimes it's nice just to take pictures for myself, to not be hired, but just to follow my own desire to photograph someone. So through a couple of just logistical things, it was set up that I would photograph him one day. And it was an incredible experience. And on that day, I ended up speaking to Dinah Kramer, who ended up being my producing partner in this project. And she'll speak more eloquently than I after me. But we started talking a little bit, and we thought, really, she suggested, why don't you photograph some more survivors? And I said, sure, why not? She, through her work with the Adopt a Survivor program, had a tremendous amount of connections with survivors, all survivors dedicated to telling their story to students and through lectures. So they were the survivors who wanted to keep this conversation going. So they were all willing and able to be part of my project. And as the project evolved, really what I wanted more than anything, and what dawned upon me through the process, which was a three and a half year project, was I wanted to tell their story through a single image of who they were. When I thought of survivors prior to this project, it's easy to put this stereotypical image upon a survivor. You think of them as someone who may be now older and later on in life and frail and really so damaged from that chapter in their life. But what I came to see are these incredible people, and each one of them managed to get through that moment in their life and managed to live through their life differently. Some got through that moment and their life with a devout faith. One of the images, the first image in the presentation, was of this wonderful, kind man who's holding very tightly onto his yarmulke in the image. And to me, that represented someone who was holding on to his faith, maybe in that time during the Holocaust, and frankly and clearly many decades later, still doing that. Another woman, God bless her, she has since passed, but she came to the shoot with this beautiful smile and this great, lovely energy, and proceeded to tell me the dirtiest jokes I have ever heard. And she just took such delight in my profound level of discomfort. And she clearly laughed her way through life. And I just loved that experience with her. Another woman prior to the shoot I noticed was holding on very tightly to her pocketbook. And I thought that was so symbolic of the stories we heard of when they were told to leave their house for some kind of awful march or to be put onto a train, and they were only able to take that which they can hold. And I thought that image was very symbolic of that. Others came to me with a certain kind of seriousness, a stoicism, but through the process of those 3+ years, I got to know these individuals as who they are, as individuals. And I wanted to capture that spirit, and present to people, look who they've become, look what they've achieved, look how they've lived their life, and hopefully to be as inspired as I was taking the pictures. So that was really the process of doing the project. And at some point, as we near the end of the project, and it was Dinah's idea, and I loved the idea of photographing 18 survivors. That number has significant representation in the Hebrew language, and for Jews, 18 symbolizing life. And I thought that was just a wonderful way to complete the project, to getting to 18 survivors. So that took about 3+ years. And then frankly, we wondered, well, now what? What are we going to do with these images? By then I had started to share the images online through social media, and the response was really great. And to the credit of my wife, she suggested that these pictures need more than a digital life. You really need to find a way to share them, to let many people, not only those that are plugged into you through social media, to experience the images. So very quickly, through a conversation with Dinah and then putting some feelers out, the Port Washington Library offered us a month-long exhibit in their gallery space, which was just beyond our wild imagination. And we were so very pleased to share the images for that month. And it started with an opening evening. And then what I loved about it was, as the month went on, you'd hear about schools coming to see the exhibit, of teachers giving students extra credit assignments to go to the exhibit and write something about it. And my intention all along was to not have the exhibit in a place that frankly only Jewish people would see. So a temple was an easy solution, but I wanted this conversation to be a little more universal. I wanted access to be for many. And I thought a library was just a great solution for that. And then in terms of the exhibit itself, it was very important to me that the images were shown larger than life. So when you entered the exhibit, and I think they're going to share some of the images of the exhibit a little bit later on, the images were each enlarged large, really, really, really large, about 30 by 40 on canvas, and as you descended the stairs into the gallery, I wanted the complete experience to be immersive. I wanted all the images to surround you. I wanted these amazing people to be larger than life. Their story was larger than life in many ways. So it was important to me that each image had quite an impact. In fact, I remember, quite briefly, I'll tell you, a husband and wife, one being a survivor, came to see their image of the survivor, and the husband had never seen the image. And he started to cry, and then I started to cry because he was so moved, and he said, "She looks so beautiful." And I think that's about as great a compliment that can be paid. Along with the images, we also interviewed each of the survivors, and some of the quotes that you're seeing now were hung around the exhibit as well. What I didn't do consciously was I didn't want it to be one image, person's name, their story, and their quote. I didn't want the exhibit to feel like a museum piece, as if this had happened in the past. I wanted it to feel of the now. And I just felt like that felt too much like when you'd go to a museum and you'd see something historical, then you'd read about their story of the past, and then you move on to the next one. So it was more of an immersive experience. And there was a lot of talk of the project hitting the road, and then COVID hit. So hopefully once the world opens up again, we will take this project on the road. I think it would be wonderful if many people from different walks of life can see these images. Unfortunately, our survivors are older now, and while they're still here, I would love for the conversation to keep going, and even long past that, even long past all of our lives, I hope this conversation can keep going. So that's really a little bit about kind of my process, how I went about photographing the images, what the exhibit was like. I know there'll be questions at the end of this, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. At this point, I will virtually hand the mic off to Dinah, who will, I think, talk a little bit more. Dinah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you?
All right, Dinah, take it away.
Okay. Am I there?
You are here.
Okay. Let's see myself. Thank you, Danny. And thank you to the Washington Library for giving us this opportunity to display these amazing photographs again. don't know why I'm not seeing myself. My name is Dinah Kramer, and I was volunteering at the Holocaust Resource Center at Temple Judea when Danny came with his son to hear Irving Roth speak about his experience during the Holocaust. As Danny mentioned, he was so taken by Irving, he wanted to reach for his camera immediately. Danny reached out to our rabbi, Rabbi Siff of the Reconstructionist Synagogue of the North Shore, to get Irving's contact information. Rabbi Jody gave Danny my contact information as well. And of course, I was easier to reach than the very busy 80-something-year-old Irving. When Danny called me and he said he wanted to photograph Irving, I really couldn't understand why. What was his purpose? I understood that he saw a spark in Irving, but I didn't know where he wanted to go with this. And at the time, I don't think Danny really knew. In the course of our conversation, I mentioned that I knew other survivors. And that's really how this project had its very organic beginning. I began reaching out to survivors I knew, and Danny's wife, Liz, wrote up some interview questions. Along the way, we recruited help from friends and family. We needed assistance with everything from helping with Danny's equipment, driving survivors, culling quotes, editing, setting up the exhibit, and more. No task was too big nor too small. Everyone who helped will be thanked on one of the last slides. And hopefully we didn't leave anyone out. If we did, we're sorry, and thank you for your help. I want to begin by saying the way you are seeing these photos tonight is similar to how I first saw them when Danny sent me the digital files. I was very impressed at the time, but the actual photos that were displayed last year blew me away. They are, as Danny said, larger than life, and they're printed on canvas, which gave them a depth that you really can't appreciate in the digital files. You will have the opportunity to see photos of the exhibit at the end. When I called the survivors to ask them if they wanted to participate, the first question was, why? At the time, I saw this as another platform, another medium, another way to show the world that, yes, the Holocaust happened, and these are the people whose lives were changed because of it. When we embarked on this, anti-Semitic acts were increasing, and I viewed this as another vehicle to teach about the Holocaust. There are many lessons that can be learned from studying the Holocaust. This watershed event in history began with words. By studying the process that led to the genocide, we hope that history will not repeat itself. The most effective tool in teaching the Holocaust, I believe, is hearing testimony from survivors. All of the survivors here have shared their stories with students. They have participated in numerous programs and have given testimony at various Holocaust museums, public and private schools, religious institutions, universities, and of course libraries, locally and all over the world. When we ask the survivors what they believe can be done to fight indifference, hatred, racism, and anti-Semitism today, the resounding answer was education. As Stanley said, education is paramount. All of them were committed to doing their part in ensuring that what occurred during the Holocaust does not happen again. Fanny, who was tormented by her non-Jewish peers for being a child in Nazi Germany before the war, said, "We must never let the world forget the evil that humans are capable of." And Baruch Gross of blessed memory said, "Never forget what the world did." I focus on his use of the word world. The Nazis did not act alone. There were collaborators and bystanders. And his childhood friend, Irving, who inspired this project, said, "Confront the racists, haters, and anti-Semites, whether they be individuals, groups, or nations." Studying the Holocaust provides an opportunity to unpack and analyze decisions, actions, and choices made by people, the roles and responsibilities of individuals, groups, and nations, the role of silence and indifference, who was an upstander and who was a bystander. Ron tells us to stand up to violence, hatred, and bigotry. Be an upstander, not a bystander. These sentiments are echoed by Vera, who said, "Stand up against every evil thing which is done to any people." Excuse me. When you listen to the testimony of a survivor, they will often mention the people who helped them. Some were saved by nations. Anita was on the Kinder transport at age 15. The United Kingdom saved 10,000 Jewish children after Kristallnacht. Evelyn and her family escaped to Shanghai because you did not need a visa to get in there. When I asked Etel where she was from, she paused. Etel was born in Romania, but did not want her narrative to say that she was deported from Romania to Auschwitz. It was important for her to emphasize that she was deported when Romania came under Hungarian rule. So yes, some countries were safer for Jews, but not enough. Some of the survivors photographed here were saved by Gentiles, and some of them are honored at Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. When the Nazis came and arrested Rachel's parents for their crime of being Jewish, a neighbor took in Rachel and her younger brother Leon and raised them as their own. Gloria's mother left her with a Polish Christian woman when she was only 3 years old. Neither Gloria's nor Rachel's parents survived. Stanley and his mother were hidden by Polish Catholics. Irving's parents were hidden by a Catholic nurse whose son-in-law was serving in the Hungarian army. Fanny's family was assisted by various individuals as they traversed Europe trying to escape. The people who assisted took great risks to their own safety and those of their families. These were not easy things to do, and I personally don't know that I would have had the courage to do what some of these people did. Ethel was assisted by young Polish boys when she was left for dead in the snow after witnessing her entire family being shot. Sarah would sneak out of the ghetto to purchase food for her family from a Polish Catholic who family did business with before the war. Ronnie and her parents were helped many times along the way. She said, "Small kindnesses saved our lives. An act of compassion will be remembered by the recipient forever." Renee, whose family was on the run and hidden by various individuals, said, "Be an example of decency and tolerance towards people of all walks of life." While some were helped by non-Jews, others had the support of their family members or other people in the camps. Eva and Vera, along with 2 other cousins, held on to each other and kept one another alive throughout their experience in various concentration camps. As you can see in their photo, they are still holding on to one another. Sarah's life was saved by her stepmother, who changed her birth year, making her 2 years older when they were transported to another slave labor camp. Ron's father saved his life by convincing the Nazi guards in a forced labor camp that Ron was a useful laborer. Werner was taught magic by his bunkmate in Auschwitz. The fact that someone cared for him gave him hope. As Gloria wrote in her memoir, "Hope and acts of love can move mountains." When the Holocaust is studied, in addition to studying heroic acts of rescue, we also look at resistance. Armed resistance occurred in the ghettos. Partisans fought in the forest. There were uprisings and revolts, even in the killing centers of Treblinka, Sobibor, and Auschwitz. Werner was hidden at one point by resistance fighters. Joanna, of blessed memory, fought in the British Army and in the Haganah. This is the tough woman who made Danny blush with her dirty jokes. Armed resistance was difficult and almost impossible in many cases. There are more examples of passive resistance, of cultural and spiritual resistance, the fight to not allow the Nazis to dehumanize them. We can learn a lot from looking at this. The will to go on and to continue living despite the odds. As Sarah said, keep going. Life has to go on. And as Johanna instructed us, don't give up. Despite starvation, overcrowding, and disease, education continued in the ghettos. Many survivors speak about continuing their education in secrecy. Renee speaks about how her mother would write the letters of the alphabet in the dirt while hidden in a potato hole. Jewish rituals and prayer sessions would take place in the ghettos, slave labor, and concentration camps. And many Jews, including Irving, even though they were already starved and malnourished, would fast on Yom Kippur. Baruch, who survived concentration camps including Auschwitz and Buchenwald, clung on to his faith, as so powerfully evidenced in the photo of him donning his yarmulke. They would not allow the Nazis to dehumanize them. As Eitel said, don't forget who you are. Gabrielle Giffords recently posited questions in an editorial she wrote in the New York Times. While the subject of what she was writing about was not the Holocaust, I think these questions are applicable. What's it like to survive in a world forever changed? How do you grieve what is lost, but move on with determination? The answers to those questions can be found in the faces you see here. Danny captured all the breadth of emotions and human spirit, the feistiness and the life force. All of these people survived in a world forever changed. We can learn so much from these survivors. These people who were children when they witnessed the worst atrocities of mankind. They persevered and moved on with determination. They rebuilt their lives and have incredible outlooks on life. Live your life in a positive manner. You cannot counter hatred with hatred, said Evelyn. Anita, who at 96 still speaks to groups of students, said, I felt I have to give back to society for me being alive. Werner teaches us that material things are only temporary. Things of value are friendships and the love of people. And Rachel, who is embracing herself in the photo, said, it was important to be alive and dance and enjoy life. And finally, Ethel of blessed memory reminds us that everybody is human and deserves to live in peace. We are going through difficult times right now, and these survivors can guide us. They are our inspiration. Thank you. Jeff?
Yes, well, thank you, Dinah. Thank you, Danny. I really appreciate you telling us more of the story of how this exhibit came together. I, again, was moved by seeing these images and the quotes that go along with them. We are going to switch over now to another shorter slideshow, which will kind of give you an idea of what it was actually like to walk into the library, down to the art gallery, and see these terrific photos mounted on the walls there. We're also going to have some time for Q&A. So now's the time. If you do have a question or a comment, go ahead and type that into the chat. That'll come to me, and we'll start to read through those as we get going. So just give us a moment here while I turn things over to my colleague, Brian, who's going to start the next slideshow. As we're doing so, I also am certainly looking forward to the time when we can actually be back in the building and having events, terrific events such as this, where it brings the community together to share different stories. When that time will be, still remains to be seen right now, but it's coming. I do feel like there is a light at the end of the tunnel there, and there will be a time when we can be actually back in this space, looking at terrific photos and other artwork there. Let's see. I think Brian's got it there.
Okay. So imagine you're in the Port Washington Library. Those of you who know the space, you walk down the stairs and this was the first thing you see. This is Baruch Gross, who unfortunately passed away before we were able to exhibit, before the exhibit was put up. He was Irving's childhood friend. And the quote is there from Gloria, who I see is on this call. And she wrote, "Hope and acts of love can move mountains." And the title of the exhibit is, you have to excuse me if my Hebrew is not good, sored, which means, it's one of the words that means survivor. It's actually a verb. So we took a little artistic license there. And the rest of the slides will move you around as we do the Q&A. I don't know if Danny wants to add
Well,
to it.
the one thing that that Dinah mentioned with regards to the name, the verb, and we went back and forth a lot. And what I liked about this particular Hebrew word was it was the present act of surviving. And I like that, as opposed to a reference. And I don't recall what that other Hebrew word was for survivors. I like that this was the very act of surviving, living. And I thought that was apropos to what the project was all about. Jeff, if there are questions, I'm happy to answer. If not, I can vamp a little.
Sure. We do have some here. I also, I'm going to share the PDF of the brochure. There was a paper brochure that was created for this event. I'm going to share that momentarily into the chat. And we do have a question from Erwin. Since the Holocaust survivors overwhelmingly said that education was a key element in stopping future Holocausts, how do you explain the fact that Germany in the 1930s and 40s was one of the most educated and cultured countries in the world? Well, that's a tough question there, but I'll pass it off to you guys there.
I'm a man with a camera. I'm not sure I have all the answers to that. I certainly don't have, unfortunately, the answer to that question. I wish I did. I cannot explain that. I wish I could.
I think people take classes on that. Deep-rooted anti-Semitism for years and years, and feeling of nationalism and propaganda. There's a lot there. As I said, there are courses on that.
Jeff, while you're looking through the other questions, a lot of people ask me in the actual shooting of each subject, photographing each subject, what transpired. And each one obviously is individual in terms of my interaction with them, but often I would ask them to remember. I tried to bring them back, but also keep them present, which is not an easy thing always to do. But for some, I asked them if they remembered a certain song, the first song they heard when they got to America. Or for some, I said, what was the first sense memory? What did America smell like when you settled into New York? What was that like for you? And for others, I asked, what was your favorite memory of your childhood prior to the Holocaust? So, whenever I work, my goal is to interact, to have an ongoing running dialogue, to bring something out of whatever the subject matter is, whomever I'm photographing. And certainly with these survivors, not all of them were comfortable in front of a camera, but my interaction with each one was just really wonderful. And those little word prompts, those little questions of sense memory, I found helped. And others it didn't. Others just wanted to kind of tell jokes, like I'd mentioned. Others were talking about their magic show. So there were so many different ways, but that was a question that I'm asked often. But I imagine by now, Jeff, you probably have another question I can answer.
Yeah, we got a couple of more here. And again,
okay.
Anyone who has a question or comment, feel free to just type that into the chat. There was a question from Jill. This is an extraordinary and so necessary presentation. She asks, how can I get involved in the Adopt a Survivor program?
Dinah?
Well, I guess if you reach out to the library and they'll send your contact information to me, and we'll continue from there.
Great. Yeah. Any further questions or follow-up, you can certainly direct those to myself, Jeff Zay, at the library, and we'll make sure that it gets along to Dinah or Danny. We have another question. Did you think about displaying photos of the survivors from before or after the Holocaust, as well as the current picture?
You know, my goal with this, again, was to make it feel of the now, to be very present. You know, I have seen, as many probably others have seen, pictures of people holding old black and white photographs of themselves from the past. And I wanted this to feel like a portrait of them, who they are now. So now there's no right or wrong way to do this. Obviously, this was just my take on it. And I wanted to celebrate some 75 years later, their being survivors and what that represented of the moment.
Let's see. Again, just comments to people very much enjoying this presentation. I do know one of the things you're getting to see here is you know, an approximation of what these photos look like in person. Danny, can you explain a little more what process you used in terms of printing these, so that they had much more of a artwork feel than just a photo print?
Yeah, so, and this is just a personal preference again, I'm very much enamored by, and I'm getting a little technical, soft lighting. It's just a way to photograph someone. There are different lighting techniques and approaches. For me, I just very much like a soft lighting approach, which is very much like window light. And if you look at paintings, often it does have that same kind of window light feel to the images. So I think that plus the fact that they were printed on canvas, a material that obviously is used in painting, gave the images a quality that felt as much a painting as it is a photograph. I did see multiple people going really close to the images, questioning if they actually were photographs and not paintings. And I promised them that I do not have any ability to paint, and no way could I have pulled this off with a paintbrush.
A lot of people thought they were oil paintings.
Yeah.
They really had that quality. We have a comment here. Again, you're gonna have to be patient with my pronunciation here. Kol Hakavad, way to go to everyone involved in this wonderful and important project. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And I'm having a little difficulty sharing the PDF in the chat. I'm going to work on that. One other question. I know that this was referenced before, that there was plans to take this show on the road. Obviously, you don't have a timeline on that, but can you tell us a little more about where you may be headed next with this?
Yeah, before I do that, can you pause on this slideshow? Because I thought I could give a little background on these two pictures. I don't know if that's possible, if I'm asking.
Sure. Yeah, Brian, you just hold on that slide there.
So, and then I'll get back to your question with regards to a tour of the project. I know Dinah referenced it briefly. The survivor on the left was hugging herself, and she's a wonderful woman with this wonderful energy. She came to the shoot talking about her dancing, her love of dancing. She danced a little for me. I think I danced a little for her, and then she just talked how important it is to love oneself. So I said, well, show me that. And then she hugged herself, and I just thought, again, like, what an incredibly unique gesture that she presented to us, and not what you'd expect when you looking at someone who had survived the Holocaust. The woman on the right, who hopefully Dinah can refresh my memory of her name, Ethel. Her face just says it all, you know, and it doesn't really do justice in this slide, but it is a tight shot. So where many of the shots were pulled back a little, I just loved her face, was so interested in just capturing every line, every detail of her face. I will say some of the survivors were not terribly thrilled with me capturing all their lines and all their details, and but nevertheless, and you know, I don't think I would like to see myself, frankly, enlarged to a 30 by 40, but that's just a little bit of a backstory in those two images. With regards to taking it on the road, you know, Dinah and I are open to suggestions, or open to, frankly, help. It's a lot of logistics to move a project like this, but the images are still available. Dinah has them wrapped perfectly in her house, and they are ready to go somewhere else. And we are 100% open and interested in keeping this conversation going. I would be nothing more than thrilled to be able to tell this story over and over again.
We did have plans to, it was supposed to be displayed again in a library in the South Shore in March, and then COVID hit, and it was supposed to be at the JCC, I think, in Plainview on Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. But again, the pandemic hit. So, and then people reached out to us about bringing it into the classrooms, and we can work something out. I think that would be great. These are books that either some of the survivors here have written or are written about them. So here's a list of the books that that the survivors here, if you want to learn more about their stories, these are some of the books. And how we'll make that available. That's not in the, we'll figure out a way to make that available if anybody's interested.
Absolutely. Again, I apologize for having trouble posting the file. I'm going to put my email there into the chat in a second, so that way anybody who needs some of this information sent to them can contact me directly. We do have a couple more questions and comments. A question from Gary. Can you share a little bit more about what the experience of being photographed was like for the survivors?
The experience of how the survivors felt about being photographed?
Yes.
I mean, I think each individual had their own experience with it. Certainly some were very comfortable, and we had a blast. You know, we were joking and dancing and laughing. Others, you know, were frankly on in years, and it was a very short photo session. You know, it really, some couldn't stand. So each one was individual. But, you know, I think to the person, every one of them felt the need to keep the conversation going, to tell their story, to allow, even if they didn't want to be photographed, to allow me to do it so that we can have exhibits like the one that we did have and that we're having this evening. So I think like any group of people, some are thrilled in front of the camera and enjoy it, and others are horrified. I guess as a photographer, that's my job to hopefully put people at ease enough to allow their truth to bubble up and to be captured. And that's really what I'm always striving for in my photographs. This is Irving, by the way, if you can pause, I don't know if you can. This was, he was the individual who was really the inspiration for the whole exhibit, you know, and I think this image is very symbolic of a man. You know, he speaks a lot, he goes and tells his story worldwide. And I don't know, this image to me, and I don't remember which president, but there is a portrait of one of the United States presidents that looks very similar to this. I think it's Kennedy, but I don't, something about it just really drew me in from all the photos of him. But, you know, he's also a man who's got the weight of the world on his shoulders in a way, because he is so compelled to tell this story, you know, a man in his 80s with a full calendar of traveling the world, you know, and I just felt this image symbolized who he was.
He's 91. I think the
God bless
pandemic
him,
curtailed his flights.
Amazing.
So we have another couple comments and questions. Alvin says the ultimate coping mechanism to love oneself. Very well said.
Yes, indeed.
And then Gary has a similar question. It's so impactful for us, the observer, just wondering what being photographed was like for them, and then what it was like if they were able to see the exhibit, which I know you spoke about a little bit.
I spoke briefly. Yeah, you know, I think their experience seeing their own images ran the gamut. You know, I had told you one husband cried when he saw the image of his wife enlarged on the wall. I think I got a couple of stern sentences about why do you have to show every wrinkle in my face? Why couldn't you Photoshop that out? They actually said airbrush, which in this current stage, you can't really airbrush on a computer, but you know, that was something they said to me. Others, I think really were really appreciative of it, and you know, and just stared at the image and really took it in. So it was quite an experience seeing them see the images.
This picture here, that's Werner on the right. He came down. He actually had flown back from Europe on a speaking tour, and he saw that picture, and I heard him go, "That's me!" And he's like.
Yeah, I think it's one thing to speak and talk. It's another thing to come down and be part of the audience in a way. You know, they were they were there because they're on the walls, but they're also an audience member viewing it. So I think it was a unique experience for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Another comment and question: the uplifting, positive attitude you encountered is really wonderful. Did you find any bitterness or anger about what they experienced?
I didn't find bitterness, and if we go through the images, you'll see certain images where maybe there's a melancholy sense to the image, or there is a more of a stern look on the face of the survivor that I photographed. You know, what I didn't want to do is put my own preconceived notion of who they were onto the image. I wanted their truth to come out and to document that. So I definitely felt not so much bitterness, at least with my time with them, but certainly for some a melancholy feeling, and for some certainly there was a seriousness to them, you know. And when I sensed that, it wasn't for me to get them to laugh or dance; it was to capture how they approached their life. So certainly, you know, there were 18 survivors, and it ran the gamut with regards to how they walked through life.
We have a comment here from Lisa. Thank you for sharing this important collection. So moving. And again, I've shared my email there. Please feel free to contact me if you're wanting a copy of the PDF or to get in touch with Dinah or Danny. Barbara adds, thank you, Dinah and Danny, for these wonderful pictures, a special night of history that needs to be kept alive for future generations. And yes, I'm going to add Danny's website. Someone just recommended I put your website up there too. So I'm going to add that. And I guess, Brian, when you're able to, I know that we have a thank you slide. Let's make sure we get that up there. I want to thank my colleague, Brian Viner, who's assisting me the other end of this screen. And there was a lot of work that went into, obviously, the original show here, and then, of course, putting together this virtual reprisal of this program as well. We have another, let's see. Well, I going to add, just bear with me. You guys can hang on just one sec as I'm putting Danny's.
Thank you to the library for doing this again, for hosting us.
And if anyone is shy and they don't want to ask now and they have a question for me, please, I think Jeff just put up my website. Reach out through my website. I'm happy to clarify anything, answer any question, whether it be technical or more of a creative side of it. I'm happy to answer anything. It's really my pleasure and joy to talk about this exhibit. It's an honor of mine.